Hi, I'm Chelsea,
And I'm Tony Northrop.
and we're here to talk about the long awaited, much anticipated, and finally real 7D Mark II.
After 5 years, Canon finally released an update. Now, this is a live broadcast, and we're doing it live for one, so we can get it out immediately. It's kind of breaking news, but we also want to be able to receive your questions, comments, and corrections in real time. So if you have any questions, if there's something we left out, if we made a mistake, go to sdp.io/talk and say what you got to say. Chelsea here will be going through the comments. I'll be doing most of the talking, but she'll be looking at your
I'll be doing the
questions
reading.
and reading it to us.
Yeah.
So what we're going over today, we're going to go over some product shots of the new 7D Mark II, talk about the specs, look at some sample shots, and then go over in comparison to some of the most important cameras, the original 7D, of course, the Canon 70D, the 5D Mark III, and the Nikon equivalent, rough equivalent, the D7100. Then, of course, we'll go over some more of your live questions, so submit them now. And do us a favor, help support us by sharing it, telling your friends right now on Twitter and Facebook that they can join us and get their questions in. And that's how you can support us.
Yeah, Tony's Twitter handle is at Tony Northrop.
Yeah. And Chelsea Northrup.
Chelsea Northrop.
No P.
I'm not a glamorous woman.
This is the back of the 7D Mark II, and it's pretty unremarkable. We'll show side-by-side comparisons later, but this looks almost exactly like the original 7D with one big difference, and that's this dial right here. And what this dial does is, by default, it allows you to change between the different autofocusing modes. And if you worked with any of the Canon cameras before, you know that this can be really helpful because sometimes, well, if I'm shooting a bird in the sky, I like to have all the autofocus points enabled because it will move around and I want it to be able to track it between the different autofocus points. But if you're shooting, say, a flying bird moving through the woods, you don't want the camera to grab onto the trees in the background, so I'll use a single autofocus point. So when time matters in action shots, I'm constantly switching between the autofocus modes, and that will allow me to do it much faster without having to hit a button and scroll and stuff. Anyway, that's a good addition.
So,
thanks, Canon.
related to that, do you
Yes.
mind if I start interjecting
Jump in.
questions? Because this relates. Carl Eric asks, is this the ultimate wildlife camera?
I think so.
I think so,
I've
too.
pretty much gone through everything. It is, well, we'll go through all the details, but 10 frames a second and remarkable autofocus system that we've never seen on another camera before.
Yeah.
Wildlife and sports, I think it's the ultimate camera. For just about everybody else, I might send you somewhere else, but we'll go over it. Feel free to jump in anytime.
Okay.
This is the top of the camera, completely unremarkable. It basically looks exactly like the 7D, the same kind of display here. And the side of the camera, we'll take a little more deeper look into the different ports that are there because some of those have changed. And of course, you can put a vertical grip on it. It allows you to hold the camera sideways. Not something I like to
a
use.
recurring question is a lot of people want to know if it's a good camera for video. How's the video?
We will dig into that
We're gonna dig in.
a little bit, yes. And they did announce some great features that will make it more competitive with the 70D, which has been a fantastic video camera for us.
Okay.
I want to show how it falls into the Canon APS-C lineup. This is the smaller crop factor cameras with the smaller sensor, and it's basically the top-end camera down here. These are all the kit prices, so with a lens, and you can see it rings in at over $2,100, which with that kit lens puts it into pretty close to full frame territory, but it is better than all these other APS-C cameras. Showing you how it compares against the Nikon lineup here. It would be pretty closely related, comparable to the D7100. They're both the kind of action and sports cameras. The D7100 is a little bit old. It's falling behind a little bit, but it's also less expensive. Go over some of the key features here. 20 megapixel sensor, which Canon says is not the same sensor as the 70D, but it's got the exact same megapixel count. It's got the dual pixel AF, just like the 70D. So I'm going to guess that it has similar qualities. Canon didn't say that they improved the dynamic range or the high ISO performance, so it sure seems like it's going to be the same. So that's one of my disappointments here is I don't think we're going to see an improvement in image quality, and Canon is already so far behind Nikon and Sony and Fuji and Olympus and Panasonic that it's really too bad. But the Canon 70 did have a workable sensor, especially for things like wildlife. The ISO range is pretty unremarkable. It's expandable to 51,000, and they're advertising a better metering system that we'll go to in just a bit. They're adding a GPS and a compass into this, so that's something that we see in the 6D. I don't know if the 6D has a compass, but it does have a GPS, and I find it useful. it will tag your pictures, and then when you pull it into Lightroom, you can see your pictures on a map. So imagine that you're going out finding wildlife, and you just find a great spot. You can take a few pictures, and then when you get back, you can look at it on a map and be able to find your way back there.
I get the GPS, but what's the compass for?
I don't know that it's that useful. It tells you which direction you're facing. It looks kind of cool on the map, and I think it's easy to put in.
Okay.
But you're right, you could probably figure it out once you got there. Finally, they have an intervalometer and a bulb mode built in. This is the silliest thing, but if you wanted to take repeated pictures over and over again, you had to buy an external shutter release. So finally it's built in the software. Nikon, Olympus, Panasonic have had this forever. On the previous Canon cameras, you could install the Magic Lantern add-on, and it would do that, but it's better that it's built in. Thank you, Canon. Now I won't need Magic Lantern for my still photos. It has an all magnesium construction. They're saying it's weather resistant, and you can, I guess, drop kick it and drive over it with your car. I don't know. Anyway, it's durable. The shutter's rated to 200,000 clicks, and it's supposed to be quieter. I've never had a shutter break, and we go way beyond the ratings. But I do know that it happens, so they're saying that they want this to be a pro camera.
Okay.
I figured out you could go through all those clicks in like 2 days or something, 3 days, if you held the shutter down. So I guess they could test it out.
If you held it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
It has 2 card slots, an SD card and a CF card. The previous 7 only had a single CF card. We love having 2 slots because, for one, if you fill up one card, it will automatically go to the next one. So it's a great backup. But 2, you can write to both cards simultaneously so you don't lose your shots. That's not necessarily the best way to go for wildlife and sports because that will slow everything down. The CF card is much faster than the SD card. So for sports and wildlife, you're probably going to be using that CF card more than the SD card. For video purposes, it has uncompressed HDMI out. And if you don't know what that is, then you probably don't care. But you could get an external recorder and get higher quality video out of it, basically. Or if you're doing a live broadcast like this, you could connect the camera into the switcher and use it like a regular video camera. We weren't able to do that with the original 7D or the 70D, so we had to go with Panasonic cameras. So it's nice, it enables the camera to be used in this kind of scenario. I want to take a moment and plug the buying guide, which is the sponsor for this show. It takes a lot to set up a live broadcast like this, and when we review these cameras, we have to pay for them out of pocket. So you can help support us by buying the buying guide. I just released an update. It now has 15 hours of video built into it and over 350 pages. I think it's 366 pages. It's a huge book. I've been working on it for years. It has unbelievable detail about every single major camera manufacturer out there. This new update covers mirrorless cameras in great detail as well as DSLRs. Do check it out at these links, sdp.io/USBG for those of you in the US, that goes right to Amazon, or sdp.io/buybg for those worldwide that buys it directly from us. We put an envelope and ship it to you. More of the video capabilities, you can see it has mic and headphone jacks. No big deal. This is a big deal though. It has the Movie Servo AF from the Canon 70D, this camera here. Dual pixel AF that allows smooth and continuous focusing while recording video. So somebody asked about the video, and this kind of comes back to that. It should be much, much better as far as the autofocusing. If you've ever tried to autofocus while recording on any of the cameras, Canon cameras besides the 70D, it's awful. The brightness of the exposure completely changes, and it kind of jerks back and forth, and it takes a super long time, and it's real frustrating. And they're making the video AF tweakable, so you can kind of tune it to be faster or more sensitive to your specific needs, so it should look a lot better. But compared to the 70D, the 7 has one real problem when recording video, and that, 2 real problems. It doesn't have the tilty screen.
Tilty screen, that's a deal breaker for you.
Especially when recording video. But it also doesn't have a touch screen. So I don't know how you go about activating the Movie Servo AF without a touch screen. Like, I'm sure you can move the joystick around and select a focusing point, but if you do that, you're going to be shaking the camera. So with a touch screen, you can change focusing points by touching it, and you don't have to shake the camera around. So we'll have to test it out, but I don't know how you're actually going to get good autofocus out of this system without a touch screen. Give us a touch screen. If you're interested in how effective those video focusing capabilities are, watch our review of the 70D. I believe it's going to be basically the same system, maybe a little bit improved, but it shows you what it looks like on the older cameras versus the newer cameras. So you can go to this link, sdp.io/70dvid, after you watch this to check it out and see just how impressed we were. It does things like allow you to track a person as they're walking towards you. So for sports or any type of video, it just looks so much better. You can also do kind of automatic focus pulling, switching between something in the foreground and the background so it looks nice and smooth. Very cinematic. It's so superior to every other video focusing system in the Mark II or the Mark III, the 5Ds. As far as video goes, it also bumps up the frame rate to 60 frames a second in full HD. The other cameras can only do, all the other Canon cameras can only do 1080p, 30 frames a second basically. So faster, it allows you to do slow motion or just smoother video on places like YouTube.
Wow, you're just answering all of these questions without me having to ask. And you're not even taking a breath. It's like you're at an auction or something.
Yeah, I've learned circular breathing like Kenny
You're like
G.
Kenny G. Okay.
The autofocusing system on the new 7D Mark II is pretty remarkable. It has 65 autofocus points, which is more than even the 5D Mark III, which only has 61. But it's also got, all of them are cross-type autofocus points, which means they're all fully capable of moving very, very quickly. Even the 5D Mark III, a lot of those are not cross-type points. And we'll see in a second, they're spread around the frame in a way that Canon hasn't done before. So I think for wildlife and sports, the autofocus system is killer. It's got this system called Intelligent Tracking and Recognition pulled down from the 1DX. And indeed, the 1DX is pretty amazing as far as tracking subjects goes, but we'll just have to test it because there aren't really specs that we can talk about for that. They're saying it focuses down to -3 EV, which is much better than the 7 or the 5D Mark III. By comparison, the Canon 6D focuses down to -2 EV. But when I tested the 6D against the other cameras, I didn't see a huge low light focusing difference. So we'll have to test this and see if it's actually effective or it's just a number that they're throwing out. And finally, as we mentioned, it's got the dual pixel AF, which besides helping during video recording also helps you when you're using the live view screen, because the regular phase tech focusing only works when you have your eye up to the viewfinder. So if you have to hold the camera over your head or out a little bit, you're going to be using that contrast-based system in most cameras, but in this one, it's a full phase detect system, which is much smoother. So live view focusing better. Here's a sample shot from Canon showing how those AF points are spread around the frame. And in just a minute, I'll show you how those compare to the Canon 7D, the original. But you can see they're very close to the edge of the frame here, very close to the top here. And that's also really helpful for composition because we like to use the rule of thirds. And in most cameras, the autofocus points are just bunched right around the middle here. But the fact that you can go out to the corners makes it much easier to use the rule of thirds, especially when tracking moving subjects, when you can't use focus recompose. The buffer. This is a huge deal because, well, you know, Chelsea, when a bird's flying towards you, what happens after like 3 seconds of shooting that bird coming at you?
It just stops.
Yeah.
The buffer.
It stops and then it goes from taking 10 frames a second to taking 1 frame a second.
Yeah.
And if you start shooting the bird too quickly, then just when it gets close, when you're getting the perfect shot, it goes
and then usually it's gone by the time
yes.
it's right where you would
and
want.
you get so mad when you have a small buffer. So a bigger buffer is a huge deal. We'll compare how many images the other cameras get, but having a buffer of 31 raw images is pretty huge. That puts it way above the Nikon equivalent, the D7100, and way above the previous Canon 7D. Gets it in close to the much more expensive 5D Mark III. Let's look at a couple of sample shots of the intelligent viewfinder. I think this is Canon's answer to the electronic viewfinders that are in mirrorless cameras. They're so beautiful that Canon's now trying to make them look a little bit nicer. Let's see, where am I? Okay. Here's my intelligent viewfinder sample picture, and you can see they've added a whole bunch of information. It used to just be this kind of 80s LCD display down here, but now they have all this other information overlaid on the picture. Should look much better. They have things like virtual horizons on here to let you know if you're tilting to the side a little bit. Very useful for wildlife where it's easy to get tilted to the side. This also shows you just how spread out those autofocus points are. Excuse me. Canon's also announcing that they have a much improved metering system, and that's good. But I can't assess that in any way. We just have to try it out. I'll say Canon is not famous for their metering system, so I hope this will be an improvement. It also allows spot metering linked to the AF point. I have not found that spot metering works especially well for wildlife and sports, where the subject tends to move around the frame. But if it's linked to the AF point, that's certainly an improvement. So maybe it'll actually make spot metering for action a useful topic. This is something nobody has ever done before, and I don't know how to assess it, but anti-flicker shooting. It's mostly a video problem. I've never thought about it with still photos. But when you're shooting videos, lights have different frequencies that they kind of flicker at, and usually it's so fast you don't see it.
Yeah.
But sometimes during video, the frequency of the camera and the frequency of the lights get into this thing where you see a weird flicker. So this camera, 7D Mark II, can detect this, and it warns you about it with that intelligent viewfinder. And theoretically, it can also wait a split second until the flicker's kind of at its peak to improve the exposure. And because lights will kind of change their color balance during these flickers, it might also give you better white balance. Something we'll just have to test.
Okay.
USB 3, good. Faster, especially if you're tethering. That can be really helpful. Means you don't necessarily have to carry a memory card reader when you travel. You can hook it up and unload your pictures, and they'll come out much faster than with USB 2. It's already up for pre-order, and you can get it at sdp.io/7d2 from Amazon and help support us. They'll be shipping it on November 17th, so it takes a couple of months before they'll actually be ready. The price for the body is $1,800, and the price for the full kit with the kind of crappy kit lens that they have is $2,150. Asking only $350 for the lens isn't too bad. This is the kit lens here, the 18 to 135. It's a decent kit lens. We like it for video. The stills aren't going to turn out real sharp, but it's kind of a power zoom. Or a super zoom. It has a great range on it. Instead of that kit lens, I might suggest, if you don't mind spending a few extra bucks, the Sigma 18 to 35. You can see, check it out at sdp.io/s35, and we have a full review of it against that kit lens. It's unbelievably sharp. As the DxO marks show, the Canon kit lens got rated at 9 perceptual megapixels. The Sigma got rated at 15 perceptual megapixels. I much prefer the Sigma because it's designed for APS-C sensors. So a lot of people who want sharper results end up buying a full frame lens. I instead suggest getting this Sigma optimized for APS-C sensors. It's f1.8, unbelievably fast, so great for low light conditions. And even though it doesn't have the range, doesn't go to 135 millimeters, you can crop this down to about 100 millimeters and still get sharper results. So because it's so much sharper, you can actually crop and basically get more range out of it. Let's look at some useless sample photos.
Okay.
You can take pictures of a guy riding a motorcycle.
I thought that was a cool picture.
Yeah, it's a cool picture. But they give you these low resolution pictures that you could take on any camera. And so that's cool. There's that chick. This tells you nothing.
She's not very good at drinking water. That's not how you do it.
No, she must be really embarrassed that this got leaked out. I don't think Canon should be making fun of people with drinking problems.
Yeah.
There's this and some wildlife. The only thing we can tell from these sample pictures is that Canon is focusing on sports and wildlife. They didn't show any portraits, any landscapes. They see this as a sports and wildlife camera, and that's true. The pictures themselves could be from any camera. Some stuff I'm disappointed in.
Oh no.
I don't anticipate any image quality improvements. It still has an AA filter. Taking out the AA filter would improve the detail
asking
so much, especially for wildlife. We've seen it on the differences between, say, the D800 and the D810, and it really gives you much more detail. And a camera like this should not have an AA filter, especially not for sports and wildlife. For the video, no 4K, no raw video. It also doesn't have an electronic viewfinder, which I wouldn't have expected. But if you get, say, a Panasonic GH4, which is even less, you get 4K, you get an electronic viewfinder, and you get an articulating display. So for people asking about video, get a GH4. Cheaper, better. No tilt screen, no touchscreen, as we mentioned. Also has no Wi-Fi, remarkably. You would think Wi-Fi would be a kind of staple of these cameras. Some of the lower end cameras have it, but this one does not. For video, it also completely lacks focus peaking and zebras. These are things the GH4 have, all serious cameras have. The latest Nikons have zebras, but not focus peaking. It also, this is the big one, no F8 autofocus. So that's the only thing really stopping it from being the ultimate wildlife camera.
Yeah.
Because you can get a D810 and it has F8 autofocus on a lot of the focusing points. And it works fantastically. So you can put a teleconverter on your wildlife lens and bring your you could put a 1.4x teleconverter on your 400 f5.6 and still autofocus. You could put a 2x autoconverter on a 500 f4 and still get autofocus. But with the new 7D, you won't be able to. So you'll have to manually focus it or not use the teleconverter.
Yeah.
Want to throw a quick plug in for our live show. We're live every Thursday at 5 o'clock, reviewing pictures instantly, taking your questions, covering the latest news.
Reviewing portfolios sometimes.
Portfolio reviews. So check us out, subscribe to our YouTube channel to get get notified of the latest shows, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Now let's go over some comparisons with other cameras. Here are the backs of the original 7D and the 7D Mark II. And you can see the only real difference is they now have this dial around the AF joystick. That dial will allow you to switch autofocus modes, as I mentioned earlier in the show. Otherwise, basically exactly the same. But we were happy with the original 7D. They kind of implied that the build quality is more like the 1DX now.
Yeah.
I never liked the build quality on the original 70D. The buttons in particular would get real flaky. And sometimes the AF on button would even kind of stick a little bit. It was just cheaply made, especially compared to the 5D.
I remember having that problem.
Yeah, so I'm hoping it's going to be better now.
Yeah.
To go over the specs line by line, the 7D goes for about $1,100 new or $600 used. So it's actually a lot cheaper than the 7D Mark II is currently. Only like 10% more megapixels, so that won't make a huge difference. But one of the big differences is the new 10 frames a second in the 7D Mark II. That's pretty remarkable. You'd have to go up to like a $6,000 camera to get that from a DSLR. Now, you can get 10 frames a second from an A6000 or a GH4, but those are mirrorless cameras, and they do a crappy job of tracking moving subjects compared to these cameras. The DSLRs will just track way better. So the 10 frames a second really is remarkable and a good upgrade from the 7D. That extra 20% frames will make a difference for moving subjects, for things like a kid swinging a baseball. You know how you want that ball?
Right in
You
the
want to
right
catch
spot.
it right as it hits the bat. It's so hard at, say, 5 or 6 frames a second, but you double your chances if you get up to 10 frames a second.
Or when we're trying to get an osprey hitting the water right at the right moment, you can just
Yeah.
have your timing off, so that it ruins it.
I get sarcastic comments from people like, how many frames a second do you need? But
All of them.
all of them, right?
All of them.
Stuff happens inside of a second. A second can be a huge period of time for wildlife and sports. So getting a few more definitely helps. I mentioned the buffer is bigger now, from 22 frames before it started slowing down up to 31 frames. Still means you only get about 3 seconds of shooting at full speed. So you're still going to have to wait until you can see the whites of their eyes, as they say, before you hold that shutter down. But you will get more shots out of it. That's good. Has a new metering system, 60 frames a second, and better AF for video. The big difference here is going to be the autofocus system. 65 AF points compared to only 19 on the 7, and we'll show you how those are spread out better in a second. 2 memory card slots, which is a big upgrade, as well as GPS and an intervalometer for night shots or time lapses, and a compass built into it. Here's the autofocus layout of the Canon 7D, the original, and here it is for the 7D Mark II. So before, after. You can see that they're just spread out across the frame. That's going to be really, really important for those of us who can't use focus to recompose, especially for moving subjects. Quickly compare the original, the 70D to the 7D Mark II. You can see the layout is pretty similar. The 70D has an articulating screen, which the 7D continues to lack. The 70D also lacks this really important joystick here for selecting your autofocus points. You can use the control dial here, but I just find the joystick works so much better, especially for wildlife where you're constantly moving that thing around. You can see the 70D, a little bit cheaper than the 7D Mark II is going to be basically the same sensor, only 7 frames a second instead of 10. It makes a difference for wildlife and sports, but not for anything else. A buffer about half the size, so that's going to be a real problem on the 70D. You just won't get many pictures before you run out, and in our experience, we use it for sports and wildlife. It is a problem.
People are asking if you would recommend the 7D Mark II, even if they're not specifically doing wildlife or sports photography. Do you think it's a good general camera?
No.
No.
Probably
so
not.
You think it's more specialized?
Yeah, this is definitely a specialist camera.
It seems like they're trying to make it a specialist camera.
Yeah, and it really is. So for portraits at that price, I'd push you to the Canon 6D.
Yeah.
Maybe even a used one, because then you can take advantage of the full frame lenses like the 70-200 f2.8 or the 85mm f1.8, and just get more background blur and better image quality too. If you just want a general shooting camera and you have the money for the 7D Mark II, I'm still going to push you towards the 70D because it has that articulating screen and a touch screen and Wi-Fi capabilities. And these are things people want for general shooting.
Yeah.
They want to be able to put a picture up on Facebook. They want to be able to focus by touching it, hold it over their heads and still see. Like, those are important things that are missing.
Yeah, I think those are important things, but I've noticed a lot of people don't care about them.
They just want like the higher end camera.
Yeah. I haven't seen many people putting that much weight on the articulating screens or the touch screens.
You know, it really depends who it is, because we have a select number of people who actually communicate with us.
Yeah.
But most of the people who buy cameras are your moms and your dads and your grandfathers.
Yeah.
And or kids, and they actually care about those things more than magnesium construction.
Right.
You know what I mean? So for most people, I'm still going to push them to the 70D.
Okay.
The 70D, again, has the 7D autofocus system, so you'd expect the same things. Only one memory card slot, but it does have Wi-Fi, and it lacks GPS and a built-in intervalometer. Quick comparison to the 5D Mark III, the big daddy here. Full-frame camera, of course, costing almost twice as much, about $3,200 new, if you can get the $200 rebate that's going on right now. The Mark III has 22 megapixels as opposed to 20, but it's a full-frame camera, so they're more spread out. Now, for sports and wildlife, you often end up cropping the picture anyway, because you can't get close enough to birds. They don't want to be your friends. So with the 7D Mark II, it always has a 1.6 crop when you're using full-frame lenses. So what that means is, if you would have to crop anyway, which you do in sports and wildlife so often, the 5D Mark III at a 1.6x crop becomes only 14 megapixels. Therefore, because of the higher pixel density, the 7D Mark II actually gives you way more detail in the center of the frame, letting you get more out of high-quality lenses like the 400 f5.6 or the 70-200. The 7D Mark II also has way more frames a second. 6.5 frames a second is even slower than the previous 7D. So you're jumping up about 40%, and you're getting almost the same raw buffer. So you will get so many more pictures in that same amount of time. And of course, better video capabilities, better focusing system in general. Still 2 memory card slots, and it adds GPS and an intervalometer. To compare against the Nikon equivalent, the 7D Mark II pretty much smokes it at this point. The Nikon equivalent is cheaper, has more pixels in the middle, which definitely helps, as well as a better sensor. You can recover shadows and stuff better, which is important for wildlife. But at only 6 frames a second, and it fills up with only 15 pictures, this is the camera I'm going to recommend for sports and wildlife. The focusing system is solid on the D7100, but I expect the 7D Mark II to simply be better. Throw in another quick plug for my photography buying guide in case you're just tuning in. You can use these links to buy it. This first one is for people in the US, and this bottom link is for people worldwide. Over 350 pages, including all the new cameras from Photokina announced up to this point. And what are you laughing about?
15 hours of video just seems silly.
Yeah, and the ebook is less than $10, and the paperback right now is only $18 on Amazon. Big, huge book with way more than you want to know about camera bodies. I've spent years writing it. So support us, order that, and also check out our book, Stunning Digital Photography, while you're at it. You can find a link in the description. Now it's time for some more live questions. What do you got for us, Jess?
Oh man, you really answered so many. That's why I wasn't interjecting.
Yeah.
Every time
I
I
did
was
my best.
waiting for you to take a breath, you just answer the next question. Someone wants to know if it comes with a dash mount for their car because they want to utilize the GPS.
No, it's not a TomTom.
Arnold wants to know, how does it compare with the Nikon D750?
That's an interesting question because the D750 is a full frame camera. So it's only 24 megapixels too. So it's not going to have the same pixel density. You're going to see the same kind of pixel density difference between the 5D Mark III and the 7D. So you'll get more detail out of the 7D. Now, the D750 does have that amazing autofocus system from the D4S, and we haven't had a chance to compare it against the 7D Mark IIs yet because the camera's simply not available. But I think they'll be pretty similar, and the way the pixels are spread across the frame in the 7D Mark II is very promising. So for sports and wildlife, I'm definitely going to push you towards the 7D Mark II, in particular because the 7D Mark II gives you access to Canon lens lineup, which in some circumstances is better for this kind of thing than the Canon. Like you can get that 400 f5.6, which you can't get for Nikon.
Okay.
What else you got?
What do I have here? Sorry, so many questions. Owen wants to know, should I change from Nikon to Canon because of this camera? I mean,
if you're doing sports and wildlife, maybe. It's a significant improvement. I think the big contender in the Nikon world is going to be the D810. Because of the high pixel density, you can still crop down and get an incredible amount of detail. And especially in DX mode, you'll have a similar kind of spread of the pixels across that cropped frame.
Yeah.
But the D810 doesn't have nearly as high of a frame rate. So it's going to be hard to beat the 7D Mark II for action and sports. I think it's going to be the camera to get.
Richard wants to know, does it have a tripod mount?
Yes. As a tripod mount. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
See, you didn't answer every question.
You're right.
And Lorix wants to know, are SD cards going to be better than CF cards?
No, right now the high frame rate that I mentioned and the buffering that I mentioned are assuming you're using a high-speed CF card, not the SD card. The SD cards for us have always been slower. And there is a relationship there because as you start to take pictures, those pictures go into the buffer, but then the camera's moving the pictures from the buffer into the CF card. So the faster it can offload into that second level of memory, the more shots you're going to be able to get before the buffer runs out. It's slower getting to the SD cards, which means you run out of buffer sooner.
We have a potential correction from my BFF, Jerry Johnson.
Oh, okay.
He says the 72 does have the F8, have AF at F8 for the center point.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Thank you, Jerry, for jumping in with that.
That's why.
Just like the 5D Mark III, you can focus with the center autofocus point. I saw it at the last minute, and I think I just forgot to update my brain. So thanks for that correction, Jerry. Yeah, good point. It does have AF at the center point.
There really aren't. You answered so many questions, Tony. I can't even believe it.
Okay. Well, if you had a question, you could quickly go to sdp.io/talk. And I don't know. I guess if that's it, we could just wrap it up.
Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to subscribe so that you can see future breaking news like this.
Yeah, actually, why don't you tell us if you'd be interested in seeing other breaking news live broadcasts like this? That'd be neat.
Good idea.
Okay.
And if you want to check out the 7D Mark II or pre-order it, please use our link that helps us support us, sdp.io/7D2. Tell your friends. Thanks so much, guys.
Goodbye.
Bye.